recording. So let me just try and do that. I don't know whether for some reason it is recording. It didn't tell me it was recording. Right, good. Okay, right, let's kick off. So just brief introductions. As I say, I know a number of you I have come across before, so thank you. You probably already know me, but there are some new names that I can see here. So my name is Lucinda. My background is in corporate learning and development. I'm a chartered psychologist. My day job is CEO of Actus, and so we have performance management, we have talent, we have learning, and we have 360 feedback. When I was in my corporate roles, we used 360 a lot. We used it as a culture change tool. We used it for benchmarking things. So I've got a lot of direct experience of using it, and I do think it's a really powerful tool if used well. I also host the HR Uprising podcast. If you haven't checked that out, please do take a look, because we've got a host of topics that are there, and I wrote all about how to be a change superhero almost 5 years ago now, which is quite scary, launched during the pandemic. So that's me. In terms of that, don't be shy, use the chat, tell us why you're here, what you're interested in. Do chat to me in there, because it is nice to know that you're actually out there and listening, and I'm trying to adapt what I'm delivering to your needs. So in terms of Actus, just outlining what we do have a performance management tool. I know you have a fully integrated 360 feedback tool. We also have a standalone 360 tool called Actus 360 now. It's quite useful for that. We find that, interestingly, I won't go into this so much here, but one of the things I see is I personally have a preference for using 360. Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for being brave and introducing yourself. I see 360 as a development, as something that's just part of development. It's great to sit alongside performance management, but personally, I'm not a fan of using 360 feedback as part of an appraisal. Now, that is an interesting angle for some people, because there are some systems and organizations who do see it like that, and that might be something worth us having a conversation about, should you wish to. And again, I don't know, do any of you look to use 360 as part of your performance appraisal process, or do you see it as something which is a development activity that you'd want to do to develop people? Because we're going to position it largely as development. Yeah, Jess, so talent management, that's where I have got extensive experience using it as a talent management tool. And I think it does really lend itself to something like that there. So if you've got any questions on that. Great. Okay, good. So we're all on the same page so far, those commenting. Thanks for chatting in the background there, Cheryl and Jess. So the sort of things we're going to talk about here is how you can use 360 feedback as a strategic tool. So something as part of a talent management process, it fits brilliantly. There are pros and cons, and so as long as you go in with your mind, fully aware of what those are, you can avoid those pros and cons. And I will try and share some of the learnings that I've had along the way to make sure that you do those. So avoiding design and process pitfalls. And then if you're actually going to deliver the feedback yourself, which is something you might do if you're an internal. So just, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, you're from Puerto Rico. I'm going to go Joshua maybe. But yes, so we will talk a little bit about how you do deliver 360 feedback. I will touch on that in this. And as said earlier, we've got lots of follow-up content. So we'll give you a reasonably high level overview during this webinar, but you've got loads of things that you can refer back to. Great, Rod, congratulations. Would fit really well in terms of talent management. So let's get going in terms of the meat of what we're going to talk about here. Right, so I've got you chatting a little bit about 360, and some of you saying knowing a bit more about it, interested in using it. Have any of you personally received 360-degree feedback? And if you have, how did you find it? Did you find it really powerful? Did you find it a bit disappointing? What experiences, what have you heard people say about 360 feedback? Because it does sometimes get a bit of a tough rap out there. It is my view that if that happens, it's because it wasn't managed as well as it could have been. And that's one of the things we'll touch on here. So do let me know in the chat if any of you have actually experienced it personally. And while I just give you a chance to think about responding there, if you haven't personally received it, what I would highly recommend is that you do experience it for yourself. once, in terms of you have something, and actually, if you're interested in something like that, message us, because we had, I don't know if we've got, I don't think I've got it on the slides right now, but we do have an offer for one-to-one feedback. So if you thought, actually, I'd like to experience it, we've got example tools so you could run through the process, ask people to provide you with feedback, and then myself or my colleague Katie could run through it and give you some feedback with it, so support you through it. So that's something that we can offer if you haven't ever experienced it. So generally speaking, because I'm not hearing many of you saying you have had it, yeah, in terms of anonymous surveys, you have, Lisa. Was yours good? Did you find it powerful? Did you find it powerful and constructive? Yeah, so when you've had it, it's good if you've had it done well, because it is incredibly powerful to get feedback from a range of sources. And if it's, I would highly recommend that you should have the feedback fed back to you. And by that, I mean that someone, maybe in a learning and development role or a talent role like you guys, or an external coach, should provide the feedback and support you through it. And the reason that's so important is that occasionally, as humans, people don't word their feedback so well. And again, it's human nature for people to get pinpoint into a statement and get hung up on it. So it needs to be managed really carefully. And those people who've ever had poor experience of 360 feedback is generally because the provision of the feedback, as in not the report, but the coaching experience of it, wasn't ideal. And it's interesting there, Cece, you said success and effectiveness depends on the manager's capability. I would agree with that. I mean, we've worked with, there's only one client that does this, and I don't think it's ideal, where they want the line manager to give the feedback to the individual. And for me, that isn't what I would describe as best practice. They've set it up, they've made it very clear and transparent, which is a way in which you need to do it if you are going to do that. But typically, a line manager is a contributor to the feedback, and by definition, they have bias. So I would always say it's better to have a neutral third party. When I worked in a large organization, it was someone from the learning and development department. We were neutrals who would provide that feedback. It wasn't somebody who had actually taken part and contributed to the feedback report. Yeah, so for that's interesting. Sometimes the challenge is getting people to provide enough feedback. That is often indicative of the culture that you work within. So if people are not that experienced at providing written feedback, so they don't know how to do it, so they won't write any words, they'll just maybe do the rating or not complete it at all. So it in itself, it is indicative culturally, it's telling you something about your culture. And again, in the organisation I worked for, when we started out with 360 feedback, people would hardly give any comments. And then because we delivered it, I believe we built trust. And I think that was indicative of the fact that they didn't trust that someone wasn't going to come and say, you said this about me. And why did you say it? And what we did was we delivered, you know, it made sure it was always used constructively. It was all part of development, and people started to have a positive experience of receiving that feedback, and they started to see for themselves how helpful it is if someone has given them either positive specific feedback or constructive developmental as opposed to critical feedback, something that's constructively trying to help them. And they found it really powerful. And over the years, I remember after about 3 years, I looked back and thought, gosh, the business has really developed in maturity. So it is something which not every business has the maturity for 360 feedback to start with now, but it is a great tool if you want to develop the culture of maturity, and there's things you can do there. Okay, so do feel free to keep on chatting there, but just let me go back to basics. What would we say 360 feedback is? So 360 feedback, it's usually quantitative and qualitative. So the graphical is sort of the rating. So you get a question and somebody, you usually rate the degree to which they agree with that particular question. And qualitative feedback is where people have a free text box and they're able to add some extra information in about giving examples of why they've responded in a certain way and what they think. You would select a number of sources for the feedback. So typically you would have your own response, so you can benchmark yourself against it. In an organizational setting, you'd usually have your line manager, and both of those responses would be individually identifiable. And that's individually identifiable in terms of the quantitative feedback. So where you're seeing on the left of this screen here, the bar charts. Usually the individual and the line manager would have their own bar, but their qualitative feedback would be anonymized. And we recommend, not everybody does that. Sometimes people like it to be attributed, but I personally would always recommend that you anonymize the actual written feedback. And then your other sources, it's up to the way that's configurable for as an Actus. So normally you'd say it might be, if you are a line manager, it could be your direct reports, it could be peers, it could be customers. So you have other sources. We would always recommend that you have a minimum of 3 responses. And to get that minimum, you probably need to invite 5 to get enough feedback. You don't want too many, but you don't want too little. And the purpose really is to get an objective, sort of quantifiable insight as to how your behaviours are currently perceived, and strengths in any development areas. And that's where it fits so well with development. It really can be powerful for people to, they'll often go, oh, I remember getting that feedback, back in whenever it is, in terms of personal growth. And it fits really well in something like a talent management program, where you're wanting to maybe individualize development. It also fits quite nicely at the start and the end. We use this at the start and end of, say, a leadership development program. So you might identify, if let's say people are on a mid-manager development program, you might identify the behaviours or competencies that you want to develop over the course of that training. And you could benchmark people at the start, and let's say, 18 months later, benchmark them again, and hopefully they've progressed, and that becomes actually evidence of return on investment from that program that you delivered. People do tend to be reasonably honest once they build trust in it. You may find, if your organisation isn't all that used to giving feedback, there's tips that you can give, there's little bits of training you can give to encourage people to write those comments and to write them in a constructive way. So that's what we're talking about in terms of this. We have got in the background a report. I don't think we'll necessarily, what we'll do is we'll send you out a sample report at the end when we email out to you. My colleague Katie's in the background, and unless someone wants to see it overtly, it's probably easier for you to just have a look through a sample report. Just get a feel for it. Different businesses do them in different ways, but ours would give you the different topics that you might, the competencies with the bar charts, then you get your qualitative comments next to it. We then have different things like a heat map, so you can see your top questions and your lower questions, and various other ways in which it presents the data. There's also a really nice spider graph, so you can get a real feel for where your strengths are, where your development areas are, and it lends itself then to a nice sort of coaching development conversation. Okay, so I'm just seeing the questions here because I moved it off my screen to look. Elaine, tips on how to encourage psychological safety, people being honest and constructive. Yes. Yeah, Lisa, that isn't ideal, I think, if it gets aligned with appraisals and potentially salary increments. Yeah, isn't that interesting? And it's not as trusted, because it's as soon as you, and that last bar point there, that was in some research that the CIPD said that if they thought that people were providing feedback which would impact pay, they were less honest than if they provided feedback which is for the people's development. So that is interesting. Katie's just dropped a sample report into the chat if you want to open it and have a look at it. I'll come back to your point, Elaine, because I've got some tips on this as we go through, and then I can come further on it if we're required. Okay, let's move on. So some of these points that I've actually probably made some of these as I've gone through, but it can be something, and if you've had a difficult experience with it, these are the sort of things that can happen, some of the challenges with it. Yeah, not all organisations are mature enough or have a level of psychological safety to run it constructively. So that is a journey. And I think there is this thing, Elaine, is you start in a certain point and you educate people and think about how you manage it, how you flow it through. The other thing is that perception isn't reality, and this is one of the reasons I always say you need to have a professional coach to debrief the report to help that person understand the difference between perception and reality, and just reflect on what the feedback is saying them. And some people can be highly sensitive or sensitized to feedback. There can be political relations in there. They might pick people to say one thing or another. There's loads of things there that make it tricky. You do really want that written comments to give context to bars. I think that it can be hard, and you do sometimes. And these are all things that when I am debriefing a 360, these are all things that I position before I do the feedback. Certain, it's like teachers at school. Certain people are really black and white in the way they provide feedback, and that needs managing. The other thing that sometimes goes wrong is where people obsess over who's written what. They start kind of wanting to be Sherlock Holmes and diagnose who's said what, when really what you want them to do is take this overall feel for it and take it constructively. And that's the bottom line is, right, I wouldn't say you don't use 360 in your organization if you are just going to do a 360 report and send it out to that person to read on their own. Only use it if you've got either the budget to bring in external trainers, or you've got people internally in a HR, L&D, talent type roles who can support with that debriefing to make sure that there's a kind of coaching to it. So the investment is not in the report. The investment is making sure that person gets something valuable and constructive out of the report. And if it's done like that, then, and it's managed with respect, then it's really one of the most powerful things that people can have in terms of their development. So these are your development tool areas. It's helpful for career planning. It's really helpful for retention, getting people ideas about where their natural strengths are, feeling that they've had some personalized development. And it does uncover really specific insights sometimes that other tools might miss. It's great if you want to do culture change. So it really brings behaviours around people's values and competencies to life. It allows people in a hybrid world. Remember, we're not always seeing people as much as we used to. So it gives people to visibility. People might think that they are interacting in a certain way, but because they're actually working from home 4 days out of 5, it does increase visibility and and connectivity, which is really useful. Helpful some as well for objectivity of viewpoint. I've done 1 or 2 feedbacks with people where a line manager sees a person in a certain way and everybody else sees them in a different way. And that is important and interesting for the line manager, because if the line manager, going back to Elaine and Lisa's example, when say the line manager is responsible for ratings and salary reviews, and their view may not be representative. So it does give you more objectivity. And therefore balance for this idea of proximity bias if you're not seeing people all the time. So how do you set up for success if you're doing a 360 feedback here? All right, I'm just moving my things around because I can't see all of my slides. I want to be able to see in the chat. So my sort of top tips here, if you're thinking of introducing this in your organisation, and these are high level, but as I say, we've got other resources that go into this in more detail for you. What I would do, something like 360, is first of all, make sure you choose the right questions. If you want to roll something out through the whole organisation, and you're more than an organisation of 50, or even if you are an organisation of 50, unless you're talking about values, and even if you are talking about values, you want to make sure the questions that you select are at the right level for the role. I remember working for a large company, doing some feedback to them, and there was a senior global person had been given a sort of team leader question set, and they didn't really get anything out of it. So you want to make sure that the questions are appropriate for the role. And we have got loads of sample questions both in our 360, but we also have a dictionary of 360 questions. So you don't have to start from day one. And of course, you can use ChatGPT now, can't you, for things like that as well. So do think about, if I'm developing directors or senior managers, make sure that those questions are appropriate for that role. They would be different from somebody coming into a team leader role, for example. Now, they might be different questions, but they could still be aligned with the same values or the same competencies. It's just slightly different behaviours at that different level, if that makes sense. So people management for a new manager would be more about giving regular feedback, maybe carrying out one-to-ones, whereas somebody who's a director, it might be about recognizing people more widely. So it's a higher level of behavior that's appropriate to their role. Make sure you don't ask too many questions. People lose the will to live. So really the questions need to be 20 to 30 questions maximum. And you need to make sure that you're only asking 1 question per statement. I've lost count of the sort of 360 feedbacks where people have gone, oh, because it said something like, this person, this manager gives regular constructive feedback and praise. Something like that. If it's got an and in it, then it's effectively asking two questions. And sometimes people will agree with part of the question and not the other part of the question. So it becomes more confusing. So keep the statements simple. I do recommend rolling it down top down from the most senior to the junior. You don't have to start at the top. Why do I say that? Well, the reason I say that is you always find that people want the more senior people to give feedback on others, first of all. And the senior managers are not necessarily the best at giving feedback. So if they've experienced the 360 and they've experienced the benefit of having quality feedback, they are more likely to provide it to other people. Also, with that top down, don't do it big bang. Don't try and roll it out to 300 people in one go, because everybody will just lose the will to live because everyone's asking everyone for feedback. If the average person has 9, so roll it out in batches so that you're not trying to sort of get everybody to respond to everybody at the same time. Always make sure that you have minimum response numbers. So we will not generate our report without a minimum of 3 people having responded within the sort of grouped categories, which means that anonymity is protected. Do provide professional one-to-one feedback or coaching, which I've covered. Ensure the scene is set consistently and constructively. I'm going to go on to that. And Elaine, this is your top tip really around psychological safety. That's how you protect it. And so 6 and 7, that's all about how you manage it. And that would be through the person who's providing the one-to-one feedback and coaching. Okay, so how it fits best. Senior leader development supported by coaching. So it's a great way if you're going to invest in coaching for people. So it is an investment, and it's often, it's almost more suitable higher up the organization where people have got the basics, they've been through management development, they've received things like that. So any sort of sheep dip training, I don't know if you still use that word, sheep dip training sort of taken place, but you want to personalize it. That's not to say it's not really powerful for management training, because you're getting feedback from direct reports. It is definitely valuable, but where you're wanting to personalize feedback, it's powerful. Equally, when you're measuring or embedding new values or competencies, works as a range of assessments for career development. So it could be just one of the tools. You might use a psychometric, you might use some sort of activity when people, so Rod, with your talent management, if you are assessing people, 360 feedback would be an appropriate part of your assessment centre. And I mentioned earlier being able to measure ROI on a training programme if you've aligned it with what the training programme should be developing. And let's face it, if you're in learning and development, it's a constant battle to get people to invest in what you spend money on what it is. So if you can prove that you're getting a return on investment, then that's really powerful. So what do we want people to get out of 360 feedback? How do we want them to feel? Well, we want them to feel in a way that they got something that's not just, they want to feel that they got honest feedback, and they want to feel that it's fair, and they want to feel that it's a valuable experience. What's interesting is they don't always want everything to be positive. They want also to see things that they can do differently or do more of. So we want them to feel that it was a valuable exercise to go through. But you definitely don't want them to feel demoralized, picked on, like they want to, unfairly treated. And that's where, again, it's very, very rare, but I mean, I've seen instances where in an organization, they're not managing, say, an individual in a certain way. And so the managers haven't, this is why I don't think it should fit in appraisal. So appraisal, you should be able to assess whether someone's performing because you've agreed smart objectives, and you should be able to measure whether that's happened or not. If you think you've got a problem person and they go, oh, I know, let's get them 360 feedback, effectively outsourcing the problem without having some honest conversations with them, it's a cowardly way and a potentially dangerous way to provide 360 feedback. That will give people a bad experience of 360 feedback. And it also, if it's a toxic environment, it gives people the opportunity to throw the boot in, right? It's not the way to do it. So it needs to be in a sort of growth environment where you've got the people available, the HR professionals and L&D professionals, they're available to make sure that it's managed in a really constructive way. So it's dead powerful. It's really, you want people to feel that it was a real, that they were invested in terms of that development. So if you are about to deliver that 360 feedback and you're going to do this, and if you were doing this, I do run a train the trainer session on this, but it's these themes, but we just go into it in more detail. So I'd start off and I say, look, this is my role. So even if I worked in the organization, say, look, I know you know me from learning and development, but my role here is as a coach for you. You know, I'm not going to go reporting back. This is up to you. This is your report. And basically, you need to agree what the process is for sharing the reports in your organization. The way we used to do it, which is what I would recommend, is I'd say, look, this is your report. It's for your development. So this is confidential between the two of us. I would highly recommend that you choose to go and discuss it with your line manager at the end and share your development areas. But if you can do that in your organisation, then you give the power to the individual. They don't feel that it's being sort of looked at in the background. It does depend on how you're going to do it. But that is the easiest way for people to feel psychologically safe, because they're in control and you're neutral and you're not going to go reporting back. So then I would want to ask them, how are they feeling about the feedback and how they selected their feedback givers? So some people are really excited, some people are incredibly nervous. And depending on where they are and what they want to get out of it, finding out how they selected their feedback givers is really interesting. So some people will have selected their mates, and so they're feeling a bit nervous and they really just want to hear positive stuff because they've selected their mates. And if I notice that that's the case, then during the coaching, obviously, assuming they're not really, really anxious, I might just challenge them a bit more and say, oh, well, what else do you think there is there? On the other hand, I've had people go, well, do you know what? I went out to all my most difficult customers because I really want to challenge, and they're up for the challenge. And again, you can just adapt your coaching style there to make sure that they get enough credit for things, and you acknowledge that they've consciously selected more challenging feedback givers. Now, that is an aspect you can also control within an organization. You can insist that people ask all of their, well, for example, they should really ask all of their direct reports unless someone's brand new or ill or something to respond. I don't think it's really appropriate to pick and choose, if you're a line manager of 8 people, to just invite 3 of them. So those are all interesting things. So if you're doing the feedback or you're managing the process, to make sure that the feedback givers are how they're selected, and try and make sure that that is objective. Now, of course, you're going to respond to whether they're nervous or whatever it is, and any expectations or concerns. And part of that is my 5, which is in bold there, setting the scene, which is on my next slide. So I won't explain that just yet, but I'll go into how I do that, because I always do that, even when I know I do it with any 360 basically. So I'll go into the setting the scene. So I'll come back to that because that's also a process in its own right. Once you've given the feedback, what you want to do is work with that person to look for themes, and those can be developmental, i.e. things that they could do better, but also positive. You have to, this is why it's so important to have a coach, because you want to ensure that people take the positives away. It's such human nature to drill into like the one micro little throwaway negative point and ignore like loads of positives. If there is something that they're getting a bit hung up on, and I don't understand why they've said that, then say, okay, so what behaviour might you have demonstrated that would generate that feedback? Just get them to think or reflect on what could they have done that would have given someone that perception. Also, then you carry on through the report, you get to the themes where we said we've got this heat map, which is sort of showing areas of positive and development area, and then make sure it ends in a constructive way. They can't have too many development actions, but ask them to capture key actions and next steps. And if you use a system like Actus, you can capture those as development actions. And I'd suggest that they go and feedback to their line manager as well. So that's the structure of that feedback session. And I would say you want to allow at least an hour, maybe 90 minutes if it's face-to-face for one of those. Oops. So then the sort of things, these are going into a little bit more detail about when you asked about the recipients. So I might ask, who did you ask to give feedback? Why did you choose them? What sort of feedback are you expecting from them? What kind of relationship do you have with them? What do you hope to get out of this session of feedback? What are your expectations? And as they set the scene. So those are just a little bit more micro coaching questions, all open questions that you want to ask at the start. And this is the thing. So it's, you can see that this, I would say you need at least 10 minutes to set the scene and, to especially if there's something slightly unusual about the respondents, for you to be able to make sure that you manage it effectively. So this is your piece again, Elaine, about being sort of psychological safety, getting that sense of, are they feeling vulnerable or not? And of course, you will probably have had a little look at the report in advance, and that's quite useful. And the reason these are really valuable, so I've had examples where an individual has rated themselves really highly on the spider graph, and I can see that their manager is significantly lower and the others are lower, and those ones make my heart sink. And if I have those sort of ones, asking these questions is really important. And actually, the two occasions I can think where I've had that, they've gone, oh yeah, I went to the people I've got a really difficult relationship with. I was like, oh, okay. So that means you're expecting them to, mark you down a bit. Yeah, absolutely. They're really tough relationships. So by me being able to have this conversation with them before I've even opened the report, that is automatically sort of managing their expectations that they're going to be a bit of a difference in their perception and the other person's perception. So see you later, Elaine, you can follow up on this. And that is so valuable, because if you just dive straight in, people would have that heart sink moment when they go, oh, they don't like me as much as, as I like myself. And that's where it becomes difficult. So these are really key, particularly if you know, because you've had a sneak preview of the report, that you might have a slightly difficult report to look at. Right, let me just get these things here. So this is the setting the scene. I always say this, regardless of whether otherwise, and it's a bit like ground rules at the start of a meeting. If you do this, you are going to get a better experience from it. So I always say, right, regardless, I say this to everyone I do 360 with, feedback is subjective to the individual giving it, and it may say as much about them as it does about you, right? Feedback's just feedback. It's not reality. No one's view is fact, not even your manager's. It represents a snapshot in time, so it could be distorted positively or negatively by a specific experience. So if you'd had a row with somebody the day before, it might affect your 360 feedback. Feedback is not an evaluation of your worth as a person. It's merely a reflection of your behaviours and how they might be being interpreted. Remember, some people naturally rate high or low, and they can end up as outliers, like your teachers that rate high or low. And just, they're in control. It's purely information that they can use if it benefits them, or discard if not. So for me, this is really key, is you set the scene and always say that. Don't miss it out, because then if you get to a difficult point in it, you can come back to those points. So here's just some examples of spider graphs. And this is more a train the train thing, but that we might look at here. So this was other. So they all thought the person was really high here. Direct reports blue, and the manager and the self is yellow. So this one here, that's not that for me is either somebody who is very modest or doesn't have very high self confidence and is expecting something quite low. So you prepare for that, ask about that relationship, ask who these others are, to be able to get them to get a sense of, what's the difference in the group there. So I'll be investigating a little bit here. This is an example of the one where I would be quite worried about. So you can see that this person has rated themselves out here, and even so, this is on a 0 to 5 score, so they haven't even rated themselves all that highly, and their direct reports have put them here and the other. Now, this is an example of one actually I didn't use, because clearly there was something going on there culturally in terms of that. The line manager had chosen not to comment, issue with direct reports. So that's one where we had a little look and wanted to understand what was going on separately. But those are absolutely anomalies and outliers. And if you set up for success, as I've showed you before in terms of that setting the scene, you'll almost always, it'll be fine. You can go back and say, remember, it's your choice, that's just their perception. Setting those up front, it's much harder if somebody's already had a negative reaction to something, and you go, oh, but it's just their opinion, it's everyone, it's just feedback. If you said it up front, it's much easier, and it's almost inoculation. It's a better way of doing it. So then, following the receipt of the 360 feedback, I would encourage you to coach them to identify 2 strengths, 2 development areas, if you're going to roll something like this out culturally across your whole organization, it's a really good thing to encourage people to go thank your contributors in person or by email for providing the time and insight. Because that means they go, oh, great, they had their 360 feedback. They know something happened. I mean, some people will even go, I'm going to work on these things. So it's just a quick email, say, thank you. Now, I asked you to give me feedback and you gave me some really useful feedback. I got a lot out of it. That creates a nice, positive, fulfilling prophecy. Never chastise or hunt down someone who made a particular comment. I always close on this one, and because I remember very clearly a sales director in the company I worked for went charging down the sales floor saying, "Who said this about me?" Which is absolutely should never happen. And everyone suddenly became fearful about being honest in their feedback. And I just recommend that you do share feedback with the manager for further discussion as part of development. All of those things are good ways of creating a positive flow through the organisation. Yes, hang on, right. Let me look at the questions. No problem, Sophie. We'll send you the information out. Lisa, can I manage to help in selecting the people to give feedback? Yes, they can, Lisa. There are ways in which you can oversee it. You could recommend them. We have in our Actus setup, actually, I was just putting our slide of our Actus 360. We have ways, there's different setups that you can have where line managers can guide. But certainly I would suggest that you can give guidance on who should provide feedback. It's up to you. And also it could be you just give advice as an organization. You know, if you've got a full team, you should invite all of your team. You should invite a minimum of five colleagues. So line managers can for sure help select, particularly if there's someone external or a particular role. Yeah, I have no issue with it, and you would want the line manager to take part in it usually. If you want to look at our standalone Actus 360 now, and this is the one that we could do your personalised report on if you wanted to experience it, then just get in touch. So Katie's on the call here, and just respond to the email we come out to you with, because we can show you a demo of how it works and show you, you'll get an example of a report and can talk through how it can work. If you're an Actus customer already, you can actually just add 360 onto your system. But it's a really, really flexible tool, got lots of templates. And very affordable as well if you want to use it as part of your development. As I say, the cost is not the software and the reports. The cost is making sure you've got people to provide feedback, and we can help you with that too. So yeah, so that's just closing up there. I normally I don't think I've given a summary. It's more of a practical one there. Has anyone got any other questions? We will send these resources and links out to you. Has anyone got any other questions or comments that you'd like to pick up on there? I'll just wait in case anyone does have. One of the things we find when you're inviting users, we can encourage, you can put little tips. So in our system emails, when they go out to invite contributors, we've got specific suggested wording to it, which gives people examples of how they can give nice quality feedback. So just that gives as much info as possible. Little videos, how do you write feedback? All those sort of things. So yeah, get in touch if you'd like to know more on it. There's all these resources that'll come out to you anyway. Do sign up for the 29th of April, Building a Business Case for Culture with Kathy Donaldson. That's our guest, a guest webinar. She's a great presenter and speaker. I used to work with her. So yeah, do consider joining us for that. Oh, and another practical one, mentoring. That is a real practical one like this. So if you're looking at Talent Management 360 mentoring, 22nd of May, that's quite practical as well. Thank you so much for joining. I'll close this down now.